thank you to everyone for coming. We're really impressed with the turnout. We didn't know whether anybody was going to come and hear us talk about Japanese toys, so we're very pleased that so many people have come. And I want to thank the Morikami Museum for putting on this exhibit, which I think Mark may tell you, I think it's maybe the first proper museum exhibit in the country.
Yes, for sure. So yes, thank you to Morikami Museum.
For recognizing what I think we're going to talk about and what we're so passionate about. We really appreciate you recognizing this and putting on this exhibit. I also want to thank the Japanese consulate for sponsoring this, and thank also Tate's Comics. It's always been a great spawn for the local art scene. Afterwards, go to Tate's and buy some great Japanese confections, and you'll be glad you did. I thought how I would begin my talk is I would talk about how I sort of got into collecting these toys and what I saw in them and why I became so passionate about them. And I think Mark will pick up on that theme and then talk more specifically about, he's taken some trips he's actually was inspired enough to start his own toy company to carry on the tradition of Japanese toy making.
Right.
And has actually been to Japan and visited the artisans who are making these toys, who've actually been making them for the past 40 years. And
50 years, actually.
and the painters as well. The guys who were working in the 60s and 70s painting these toys are still painting them today.
Right.
And actually, as these guys get older and retire, there's a question about whether or not this art form is going to survive or not.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest reason why both Jim and I want to help support events like this and museum exhibitions like this, is to show everybody that they are toys, but it's also an art form, and it's an art form that probably in the next maybe decade may almost totally disappear unless the younger generation gets involved. So we'll get more to that aspect of it a little bit later, and I can show you some videos of the actual process. But to me it was really eye-opening to see how each of these figures is handcrafted and hand-painted. Just an amazing process.
Yeah, for us that's really a big part of the appeal. Well, let me tell you how I sort of got involved in this, and maybe I can help you see it through my eyes and see my passion for these toys. I was living in Boston around 1990, and I happened to stumble into a store in Cambridge that was, I guess it was in a pretty, let's see if we can,
the other way. Keep going.
Okay, there we go. Okay,
Thank you.
I stumbled into the store in 1990 that I guess was pretty avant-garde for the time, and that they were actually importing Japanese toys. And you got to keep in mind, this is before the internet, and so you had to actually see these things firsthand. I mean, these were the days when it's hard to believe, but you actually had to leave your house and get in a car and drive someplace and to see things. You couldn't just research this on the web.
We're old school guys.
And so I walked into this store and I saw this Bandai line of Godzilla toys. And this is kind of a good representative example. And I remember seeing this thing up on the shelf and was kind of perplexed by it. I mean, wow, is this a child's toy? It looks way too nice to be a child's toy. It's nicer than anything you would see in Toys R Us. I mean, even the texture of it is very very representational in terms of the actual movie monster. And I remember thinking, is it a toy? Is it supposed to be sort of a mock-up of a movie prop, that type of thing? And it was a toy. And you could see a series of these toys lined up on the shelf, and each one was sort of painted slightly different. And so I immediately was sort of struck by the idea that, oh my God, there's someone who actually sits there and paints these toys, these mass-produced toys. And it was sort of my first exposure to really the extreme quality and care that goes into Japanese manufactured items. I was just struck by it just on the shelf. And so a couple months later, I stumbled into another store. There were a lot of stores to stumble into in Boston, I guess, at the time. a little store called Day Old Antiques, and I guess I had read in the paper that the owner was selling vintage Godzilla soundtracks. And I guess like most American kids, I grew up watching those things, watching those Toho Godzilla movies on Saturday and Sunday with my sisters, and we would just they were intended to be somewhat campy, and they certainly are. We would be cracking up, and there was also something just very satisfying about, I think as a kid, watching a guy in a rubber suit just smash these cities. And I was actually reading a biography of Eiji Tsuburaya, the producer of these movies, and I guess I was unaware of the meticulous care with which he crafted these sets. I mean, it was like everything had to be perfect. If he was building a reproduction of Tokyo that was going to be smashed by a guy in a rubber suit, the lights on the Tokyo Tower had to be perfect. And of course, they could only do this in one take. They'd spend months building these sets and would get destroyed in an instant. And so again, just this if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right, and we're going to do it to the nth degree. And
what era was this, Jim? When you went into Dale?
Oh, this was 1990. This was just like maybe a month or two after I got exposed to the Bandai line of toys, which was sort of my first exposure to just Japanese toys in general. And so I stumbled into Day Old, and he was probably one of the few people in the entire country who was actually selling vintage Japanese vinyl toys. And his story was that he would work for a record company, and he would go to Japan on selling trips, and he got exposed to these toys in little, antique Japanese shops in the 80s, and was just blown away by them. And so I go in and I see, things, not this particular figure, but things like this up on the shelf. And I'm just kind of completely blown away by these things.
Kitty fire.
Get a fire from your man.
From your man.
And I have always been a collector, and I've always sort of been fascinated by what people collect, and even if I don't collect it, I have a lot of reference books, and it's interesting to me just all the weird things that people collect, and how they get into this, and what's their story. And I had always been interested in decorative objects and toys and that kind of thing, and I'd never seen these things before. And it was sort of like a bolt out of the blue. I mean, how could I be so unaware of an area of child playthings? And so what are these things? Where do they come from? And what the what the owner told me is, he told me about, well, of course in this country we know about the Toho films, the Godzilla films, but in Japan there are scores of these television shows that involve heroes fighting villains. Spectre Man, Mirror Man, God Man, Condor Man, Kamen Rider, Silver Kamen. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I'm like, how do you know about this stuff? I mean, I've never even heard of these kinds of things. I don't know how he knew about it, but somehow he knew about it. And so I saw these things, and I was just kind of blown away by the by the creativity of the shapes and the colors and what's going on here. And I remember asking him, how much are these things? And I think he had said, like $250 or $300. And I thought, oh my God, are you kidding me?
That's a bargain.
Yeah, are you $250 for a piece of plastic? I couldn't believe it. So sort of my gateway into this was, these are just more examples of just these incredible toys, and I'll come back and talk about some of these slides, but this was sort of my gateway into this, is that, I either couldn't afford it or didn't feel justified in spending that kind of money on a vintage bull mark. But around the same time, there were companies in Japan in the early 90s, in some cases, this particular company called M1 Go, that was run by a collector of these vintage toys that was reproducing the toys from the 70s that were now just so rare and expensive collectors couldn't afford them, and also doing his own original sculpts, of which this is one. This is Semi-Ninja, and I'm sure this is from Ultraman or Ultra Q.
Ultra Q, yeah.